All right, everybody. What I'm going to do is I got some questions and finally some comments and questions and everything, and I want to handle those first from last week, and it sort of fits in with today's lesson. Last week we started on a little bit of we've been doing more or less philosophy, and that concerns some people. They say, "Well, I'm just here waiting for the math. I don't want this philosophy stuff. This philosophy stuff's of no use to me. I have my intuition." And so forth, and they want to just start looking at the math. Well, we'll get to the math. Don't worry about that. But what's math? How do you know? How do you know the math you're using applies to the real world? What does it mean to apply math to the real world? In what way can we say our math is either certain or an uncertain representation of the real world? Well, all of that's philosophy. You cannot escape philosophy. It's impossible. Even saying I have no philosophy is a philosophy. And so if you're going to be riding on your intuition, you better damn well hope that your intuition is exactly right on everything, which I can guarantee almost. I can't know with certainty, but I can say that as my experience is that everybody's intuition is correct up to a point. But those points differ from individuals, and nobody seems to get it right for everything. So we absolutely need this philosophical foundation. Now, normally you take a stats 101 class or a probability 101 class or even a logic 101 class. They just start right off with the rules and they get into the math and they boom, 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 boom. And they have a few words about philosophy, but they brush them aside quickly to get to the more, what they think are the more juicier bits of all this math and so forth. Well, we can't do that. We absolutely can't do that. Failing to start with the ideas of what is logic exactly, what is belief, what is faith, what does it mean to have intention, extension, concepts, grasping. What does grasping mean? What does understanding mean? What does all of this mean? If we don't have that in hand, we'll never be able to understand exactly what probability is, and we won't understand how to apply models of any kind. Any kind. It doesn't matter if you're a physicist in string theory doing all these wonderful equations and so forth. We won't be able to do or grasp or understand the weaknesses or strengths inherent in any of that if we don't first understand and have a full understanding, as we're going to get, of these topics. Now, I'm certainly not going to... This is pretty much... this lesson and maybe one after this. We still have to do intuition, induction, and all that kind of stuff. We absolutely have to do that, but we can't get there without doing this stuff first, because it's crucial to understand the different kinds of induction. I saw somebody comment about induction, about the contingency of the world. Well, that's one kind of looking at it, but there's more ways of looking at induction than just that, which people don't really understand because they've never bothered to think about these things, and you'll never get this in a regular class. So we absolutely have to start here. So it's just inescapable. It's absolutely inescapable. And we have to make sure we understand all of these things. And it's going to matter. And I'm going to show you why it matters today. Last week, I've neglected to give out homework inside the video. And I wanted to give out homework on local and the difference between local and necessary truth. So we're going to review those briefly, what those concepts are. Because I have some examples in last Friday's, if you see my site, The Week in Doom was all about truth. They had this woke NPR CEO who's talking about all the relativity of truth, and we all have our individual truths. So there it is right there. Right there. We have these lunatics running, elites, experts, all these kind of things, ruling over us, and they have no idea themselves what they're saying about all this stuff. So this is absolutely crucial that we do this, and I'll give you some examples as we go along. So, in that vein, why philosophy? I think it's just inescapable. You're free, of course, to skip these things and jump right to the math. But when I start talking about and referring back to this after I start building the math and probability models and the like, you're going to be a little lost. All right. Well, we're going to talk about belief and faith. Now, I have a sort of idiosyncratic use of faith, so we're going to go over that. But I think it's an appropriate extension in the word. I'm going to overload the word faith, but I think I have good justification for it. So let me get rid of this. I'm going to try not to talk when I'm over here so that the microphone picks it up. Oh, so here's a great book. This is a wonderful little book. It's by Peter Kreeft, Socratic Logic. If you can see that, I don't know if it's focusing in or not. I'm gonna just go over a couple of pages of this, just as boosting of some of the stuff that we had done before I get into belief and faith. This is a lovely book. It teaches you all about these basic concepts, philosophical concepts, and then builds them up into, of course, Socratic logic. Lots of examples of how to understand fallacies and all that, a favorite topic of mine and so forth. I'm not going to go through the whole book. We'll just go through a little bit of the stuff today. So, Kreeft rightly brings up that there's three acts of the mind. We can apprehend something, which means understanding it. The next comes judging, which means applying those concepts of our understanding, putting predicates to subjects, things like this. And then finally, deep below all this is reasoning. Reasoning is, of course, rationality and all this kind of things. And this is jumping ahead before we got to the point. Before we built up our foundation, everybody thinks they understand exactly what rational thinking is and so forth. Well, they don't. Some do, but most do not. So we need to really understand this. So it's important to understand that we move from, in order to grasp something, in order to understand it, in other words, to apprehend it, we move from the general to the universal. So, like we did one of Pino's axioms. Well, we noticed that if x equals 1 and y equals 1, then x equals y. Okay, we do that for number 2, x equals 2, y equals 2. Well, it works for 2. All right, it works for 3. It works for 4. It works for every number I can think of. Therefore, I move from this general to the universal concept that it works for every number. But I can't prove it in an empirical fashion. I cannot prove it empirically. I can't go out and sit here and physically move to every number and verify that the statement works for every possible number. This is, again, we talked about this as axioms in mathematics. We have them all over the place. Universals are everywhere. So, which I'll come to. So it's not just math, but it's everywhere, and we make these, we apprehend these universals through faith. In the sense, here's one word of faith, which we'll come to, in the sense that I can't empirically observe or test every possible condition. I have to just believe. I believe, and I have faith that things like this are true. Now, another universal is, of course, man. Man, the animal, the rational animal. So I can understand what it means by looking at individual men, and I can come to some idea of the universal concept of man. Or I could use, I think Kreeft uses apple. We understand what an apple is. Now, when we have these concepts are in our minds. They're not in the cells in our minds. We don't have, when we think of a man or an apple or even these numbers, when we think of infinity, we don't have infinity being a number in some senses. These don't appear in our minds. We don't have an apple that appears in our minds. There's no apple that we can bring out from our minds and place on a table. This is a concept that we hold. It's immaterial. These are not material. These are not material objects. This is one of the proofs that we need, or one of the ways that we can think about our intellects and our will being immaterial, not being material things, why we're different than computers and all this kind of a thing, which we could talk about. We will talk about much later downstream, but it's again another reason why we need philosophy. Well, now we have man. We know what man is. We know what an apple is. Now, in judging things, we take individual apples that we might see in the real world, and we say that is an apple or that is a man. All right, so that's easy enough. And then we move from there to reasoning. And we got to be careful about this because this is where the fallacies come in all the time. It's mistaking universals for individual instances. So we can go the other way around and mistake things. So I'll give you one example. Let me write this up here so people can have it. Here is a proposition. We're always working with these propositions. We always will be. All probability statements, all mathematical statements are propositions of different forms, but they're all propositions. Men are taller than women. There's a popular meme going around. All arguments with women are like this. Men are taller than women. But the woman says, but I'm taller than my husband, or something like this, as if that refutes this. This is a statement about universals. We understand the universal that men, being a separate essence than women, one of our key fallacies of our age is to doubt this, or to claim disbelief of it, or claim that one can move from one category to the other by willpower alone. This is a universal. It doesn't mean that an individual man is taller than every individual woman. It doesn't mean that. That should be obvious. But that's a weakness in language. It is a weakness in language. Sometimes in English it's very difficult to be able to convey you're talking about universals when you mean universals and you're not talking about individuals. So it behooves you, especially when you're trying to be technically accurate in scientific writing and so forth, to always describe when you're talking, if it's not immediately obvious from the context, to immediately describe when you are talking about universals or when you're talking about individuals. So you could add something like, on average, to this proposition. It's the same proposition, but it then signals you are talking about universals and not talking about individuals. All right. That's my review of the entire review, as brief as it is, and absolutely intolerably brief, of Peter Kreft's wonderful book. I suggest you get that and read it and have it on hand for identifying all sorts of fun fallacies. Okay. Now, again, well, I'll get to that in local versus conditional truths. Okay. Now, there is a definition of faith that goes around out there, and it's important to understand. Let me write it up on the board. This is the skeptical definition of faith, and this is what a lot of people might have in mind when they hear my use of it. And I do not mean this use. I do not mean this use of faith. So the skeptic faith. Okay, that's... There's a thing called a skeptic's dictionary. I don't know if it's still online. I guess it is. There's a bunch of people who call themselves rationalists and so forth. They have definitions of faith like this: believing contrary to evidence. Well, of course, that's asinine. If somebody is believing contrary to evidence, that's not faith. That's stupidity. That's an error. That's a fallacy. That's dumb. Right? I mean, that's not faith. That's not what faith is. But they insist on beliefs like this. And then they will also doubt things. They'll say, well, I have no free will. Which is the same people who say things like this tend very much to say things like this: I have no free will. I do not exist. It's equivalent. I do not exist. I'm just a mass of cells. We saw Daniel Dennett, a quote was popping around the internet the other day saying, not a single cell in your body cares about your opinions, or something like this, which is true. Single cells don't care. No cells care. Caring is not in cells. It's in us. It's in ourselves. And even Daniel Dennett knows this because he cared enough to write that sentence. So, let's talk about believing things contrary to evidence. You have evidence of your free will all around you, but they believe, contrary to that evidence, that they have no free will because of love of theory. Now, we'll get into all that at a different time. I don't mean this. I mean different. My definition of faith is not the skeptical definition of faith. Any variant of this, I think, I'm with the skeptics. It's absurd. If you believe something contrary to evidence, and the evidence itself is true, we got to be careful there, and the evidence itself is true, well, then you're an idiot. You should not believe that. But, however, that's not, especially with religious beliefs, some religious beliefs anyway, that's not how people believe. So, let's look at the real definition of faith, which is to say my definition of faith. You notice I figured out how to keep thanks to Jay again for giving me some advice. It didn't work in this case because of the BIOS thing I had. But anyway, I fixed it. So now I don't have to keep popping over to the computer to fix this. Okay, so we have a belief, i.e. without well, my handwriting is terrible, so I'll just tell you. It is belief in a proposition without empirical verification. We've already seen we have many of these. We can't check every apple in the world. We can't check every equation in the world that we have deduced. We apply them universally, and we cannot check them empirically. Not every belief can be checked empirically. In fact, all of our beliefs, including the beliefs that, for instance, all of our knowledge originates in sense impressions, except that which is revealed to us. And so we have to have faith that those senses that we have are conveying that information properly, knowing that sometimes they can err. Right, and then we move from those particularities, I should say, and we move from those, and we reason to universals, which cannot be empirically verified. So all of our most fundamental beliefs rely on faith in this sense. That's my only point about this. Faith underlies everything. We can never get away from faith, from having a belief that something is true without being able to empirically verify it. All right? That's just what we're stuck with. And to dismiss all claims of faith because you don't like the conclusions of them, well, that's just stupid too. All right. So now we'll move to something. That's all I'm going to say about faith in this entire thing, unless a little bit when we talk about induction and intuition and the like. So now let's move to belief. This is not the word you normally see. If you think about, you normally have a course in probability or something like this, and you'll eventually move to decision analysis, something called decision analysis. Well, that's belief, but they don't put it like that. So again, we have philosophy intruding even when we don't want it. So we cannot get rid of it. Now, I often say that, and this is going to be true, we can only know what is true, but we can believe anything. And now, why is that? We have to remind ourselves about the difference between local and necessary truths. So, I'm not even going to write it down, but belief is... Let me just write down the difference between what we learned last time, local and necessary truth. So, a necessary truth is where we have... a bunch of premises, however many, and we deduce some conclusion from them, where each and every one of these premises are themselves necessarily true. All the way back in the chain of reasoning to our original sense impressions, so that we can't escape philosophy, we can't escape faith. Everything relies on these everything relies on our faith and our ability to reason and our ability to extrapolate universals from particularities, from our sense impressions. So we have to trace each one of these premises back to absolute foundational data, if you like, upon which we take by faith, without empirical support. There is empirical support for particularities, but not for universals. Okay, we can't check every single thing. So we have a necessary truth. Now, these are very common in math, formally, because math is the most formal of all the sciences. So we have lots and lots of these kinds of things in math. But we can also have conditional truths. So this is a necessary and here's a local truth. That's a K. Why not? And I'll put a proposition here. Well, we have premises, which may or may not be true, necessarily true in themselves. That's something I got to be careful of. You guys should catch me on this. When I say true, I always mean as a shorthand, almost always mean as a shorthand, necessarily true, universally true. That's the shorthand way of saying true, but we get into trouble because there's lots and lots, and most of our knowledge, especially about contingent things about the world, are only conditionally true, locally true. Well, we have a bunch of premises which may or may not be true, but which may be desirable, that from which we deduce B. We deduce B from this in a logical sense, but it doesn't mean that B is a necessary truth. These are local truths. And local truths are accepted by people very readily because they really based it on false premises. So the example last week I had on the Week of Doom, there's this guy, Peter Boghossian. He's a philosopher at the University of Austin. Was he one of these dark web guys? University of Austin, it was supposed to be this new university to eliminate wokeness. Anyway, he was dismissing as irrelevant and as unimportant and as Christian criticisms of a Spanish politician who was having some sex-like ritual. He was eating his own feces. Filmed himself doing it. Somehow the video of this leaked, and the guy was forced to resign. Many jokes ensued, and this Boghossian took exception to it, saying, it's his choice, he's allowed to do that kind of stuff. So he was relying on a local truth, an argument like this. In which he had certain premises that people are allowed to do whatever they like. Now that's a whole other area of philosophy and so forth that doesn't have to quite do with what we're doing today. But that's how people can believe these kinds of things. It has to do with the idea that a man could turn into a woman just by having surgery of a certain type. So if he gets his particulars or pertinence chopped off by some quack with a scalpel, why, now he's a woman. That's a local truth to them, based on the premise that a man can become a woman if only he looks enough like one. Well, that's not what makes a man. That's not what makes a woman. So they've got false ideas about what a man is, what a woman is. But they have a local truth. So local truths are incredibly important. And that the woke NPR executive, I forgot her name, Mayer or something like this. She was saying, we all have our truths. Aha, she's right. We all have our different truths. And therefore, there's no real truth except for the truth that I'm going to tell you have to believe. And she was really saying something like this. Everybody has a collection of these local truths that they hold based on somewhere faulty premises. And it's true, they do have these. So we're not supposed to question somebody's basic beliefs, which are these questionable premises up here. And they could just as logically as anybody else deduce these conclusions from them, but it doesn't make these premises true. So yes, philosophy becomes important in identifying all these kinds of things. And it's going to become extremely important when we talk about getting away from all this woke nonsense into something real and lasting. What does it mean to have a model? All right, so we need to understand all that in more depth. So now I want to acknowledge so that the people who are following this along and were questioning, why do we need philosophy? Well, all right, some of it is arcane and irrational and weird. And that Boghossian guy, he's an academic philosopher. Should we believe he said what he says because of philosophy? He's got these tortured arguments? No. Okay. However, it can get arcane. It can get weird. And the philosophers talk themselves into all sorts of interesting positions, not because of woke, but just because of mistakes that are not very easy to see. So let's talk about that when we talk about belief. Now, knowledge is when you believe a necessary truth. Simple as that. Knowledge is when you believe a necessary truth. We have to separate truth from knowledge because a belief is an act. Belief is an act. Belief is something, you could have knowledge of something, but it doesn't necessarily mean you believe it or can put it into action or will use it or something like this. That becomes that whole area of what to do with our knowledge and so forth. We're not going to come to that for a very long time. But I want, this may be the time you can tune out, but I want you to come in back at the very, very end. Well, I'll introduce the homework, this time again, the same homework that I gave last week, but failed to give in the video. I wrote it down on the blog, but it did not take. Now, there's this guy named Bonjour. As far as I can tell, the same spelling as good day. He says knowledge is of a proposition. You can have knowledge of a proposition P. Has to have three conditions, and this is going to be interesting here. I'm only going to give you, I'm going to put on the blog a full discussion of all this, and I'm only going to give you a flavor of it here. I'm not going to harass you with this kind of stuff on this video lecture, but I'm going to show you where you can go to learn more about this kind of stuff. Someone must he's giving the three criteria for knowledge. These are the three philosophic criteria for knowledge, he says. Must believe without doubt some proposition P. I'll write it all up and then I'll tell you. Okay, he says someone must, the reason, justified, this is already one of these philosophical distinctions that causes eyes to roll over, and I understand why. Justified knowledge, and some proposition. Well, they must believe without doubt, and they must have reasons why P is true. Now, I think this is a mistake already, but the last one, P must be true. So let's reason all this out and see where I think the mistake comes in. Then I'll introduce something called Gettier problems. Well, if you must believe without doubt and you have reasons you already have reasons why P is true in the argument that you built up for yourself. Now, that may be a local truth, or it may be unconditional, or rather a necessary or universal truth. There's a difference. We've learned that there's a difference. So we got to be very careful. We could even have, I want to make sure you understand, we could even have local truths where we have all of our premises are true, but we don't have enough, most of the premises are true, but we leave something out. We could have mistakes by omission, right? We can have fallacies of omission where we don't have the full truth, the truth and all the truth, as they say. So we need to be very careful about it. So, of course, we already have reasons why we believe P, and we believe it without doubt because we've accepted these premises. To say we have doubt is we're accepting some premises unconditionally, or rather with uncertainty in them. That builds up a circularity in this I'm not going to get to. And then finally, P must be true, which he means necessarily true. Okay, so it's sort of circular, if you see what I mean. If P must be true, necessarily true, well, then we must have some argument starting with these first principles and these absolutely necessarily true premises from which we deduce P. And therefore, P is absolutely true, proved by something else. But you got to remember, there's lots of true propositions about the world that people can't reason themselves to. All right? They may reason that I have proved it. I'm a mathematician, so I've proved some theorem, like the example we gave last week. I've proved this theorem. They don't understand the steps. They can't follow all this stuff, but they trust me. They say, yeah, he's right. That is true. Because they trust me. That's a local truth to them. That's a local truth to them, but the conclusion is just as true as it is for me who proved it all out. But for them, it's different. It's a different kind of truth. It's a local truth and not a necessarily truth. So that's talking about our reasons for believing a thing, not whether or not something is true. How something is true, we talked about that briefly too, is entirely different. That's because that's the way the universe is, the way the world is. It's given to us like this. There's lots of those kind of truths, and we're not going to know them all. Okay. So this brings up this misunderstanding between local and necessarily truths brings up this idea of these Gettier problems. Oh my God, they go on and on about this stuff. I'll call them problems. They always give the word problem in academia to paradoxes and the like the problem of free will and everything. The problem with free will, just to give you one quick example, is that because people can't figure a reason for it, and I can't figure a reason for it, therefore it has to be the only reason they can think of, the model that they can think of. That's a bad fallacy. I call that the strong muscles fallacy. Okay, so let's talk about a raffle. A raffle is a kind of lottery. Everybody in the raffle has a ticket. One part of a ticket, and the other part of the ticket, a stub, is thrown as some bin or something like this. And you're in the raffle. Somebody in that raffle must win, because in the end they take all the tickets and they pull one of them out and they say, oh, number 37 won. All right, so a proposition is somebody must win. Here's a proposition P. Now, given this is our premises are raffle, the tickets are distributed to a bunch of people. There's no tickets that are not distributed, or those tickets that are not distributed are not used. We only have in use those tickets which belong to people, and we put them all in a bin, and we draw one out, and here's the winner. Somebody must win. It's a local truth based on those premises. We deduce that local truth based on all of those premises. But it's not a necessary truth because, of course, this raffle and everything else is contingent. It's a very sound argument. There's nothing necessarily wrong with believing this. So that's another thing about local truths. They can be very believable. But it's not a necessary truth. The universe isn't set up to be that raffles have to exist and all this kind of a thing. But there we go. We have this raffle. All right. Now, another way of thinking about this, another proposition, we'll get rid of this one. We'll think about this. I might win. This is a different proposition. I might win. We're going to add a premise. I'm going to erase. I hope I can erase this first one here without. Let me write it up and I'll tell you. Here's a premise. My wife told me that she bought me a ticket. I could stick that into my list of premises about the raffle. Those remain unchanged. And I formed this proposition, which I'd like to judge based on those premises. I might win. This is true. Locally true. Correct? I hope everybody gets this, because here comes the twist. Because my wife told me this. Now this guy Gettier says, well, suppose he has an additional premise. I'll call this one Q1. And if I could stick it in here, Q2, she lied. Q2 is, this is Q1 is my wife told me she got a ticket. Q2 is she lied. Terrible person. She lied to me about buying a ticket. She just wanted to make me feel better, or for whatever reason. She couldn't get to the gas station on time before the drawing or something like this. So now, I still believe I might win. It's conditionally true. I have justified true belief. But he says that's a mistake. We can't really have belief in this because now this is false. But it's not false. Because I don't consider this she lied because I don't know she lied. So my local truth is exactly the same. My local truth hasn't changed at all. Of course, if I put in this particular premise that she lied, my wife bought me a ticket, but she lied, I might win. Of course this is false. I've proven to myself a local falsity. Of course it's ridiculous for me to go on believing I might win if I believe my wife lied about buying the ticket. So all these problems, and I agree this is where it starts to get, you start reading this stuff, oh my God, there's acres and acres, there's books on this stuff. And it's all coming from failing to understand the difference between a local truth and a necessary truth, all right? Necessary truths are much richer, stronger, all that kind of stuff. Necessary truths, if we all agree about all the premises and so forth, cannot be doubted. I mean, they can be doubted, but that means rejecting some of the premises and so forth, which then turns it not into a necessary truth, but into a local truth. Now, why all this stuff? Because necessary truths and local truths, we could, in math, all those people who wanted math, well, I got all these necessary truths about math. I can go on proving theorems about probability all day. I got lots of them. There's books and books of them, acres of this stuff. But I want to apply it to real life. Now it becomes a local truth, almost all the time. Aha, it's a local truth. That differentiates it from a necessary truth. So that's different levels of awareness, different levels of truth. And we really have to keep this stuff in mind when we're trying to say things about what causes what. Okay, so let me give you the homework, which I did give you last week, but I was too stupid to put it in the video. So I'm going to put it in here now. I think these videos, I have a problem. I have the same problem as I had all the time. I can't see your faces. I can read some of the comments. I think I'm absolutely rushing these things. I'm just blizzarding through this stuff. And on the other hand, I can see how it's interminably slow, too, for somebody who just wants to get what they consider the good stuff. But so you have to tell me. You have to really tell. You could always forward fast this stuff and all this, but you need to grasp all this stuff before we can move on. You got to let me know in comments and so forth, because I can't see your confused faces. So feel free to shoot me emails, leave comments around. I read them all. I try to answer the ones that, like I said, the most important. So here's the homework. I gave you lots of examples of local truths from that Austin guy, philosopher, University of Austin philosopher, the NPR CEO, all that kind of thing. Necessary truths. I've given you a few examples of those too. What I want you to do in your life, I want you to try to write down as best you can what you think is a necessary truth. Write down all the premises and the reasons and the steps that you use to derive whatever proposition you think is necessarily true. And then also do the same for a local truth, but one that you like, not one that's easily proved false. That's, in our woke days, that's just too easy. Anybody can do that. It requires no skill whatsoever. unless you're woke, in which you don't have the skills. So try to find a local truth that you wish was a necessary truth, but perhaps is not. And that's it until next week. Next week, this week was, by the way, we just did the last of chapter 1 in my book. Next week, we started off with logic already. We've done logic maybe enough. Chapter 2, and this is logic. We have to return to James and a little bit of logic. So we may do that, or we may move right to induction and intellection. And then from all that, once we get all that out of the way, we have to return to logic no matter what, because we need it in order to build James's robot. And then we finally move to probability. All right, so we got a couple of weeks before we get there. All right, everybody, thanks for watching.